On May 14, 1909, Sheriff Cullen Briggs rode to Bethel Primitive Baptist outside Yazoo County, Mississippi, after a farmer found the baptismal floor sounding hollow and a shovel blade rang on pine where there should have been dirt. He found Elder Ephraim Sutter holding a Bible with its leather lifted at one corner, a deacon, Mervyn Coates, with chalk on his fingers, and a bell rope frayed at 17 feet from the ceiling beam. Deputy Amos Hargrove came at a trot and set down a carpenter's rule cut to 11 inches for the boy's age and the airway measure they'd soon write. Drop your city and the exact time on your clock in the comments. One question drives this. File, how far did a purification rite travel beyond one child and one floor? Bethel's side door opened into a corridor with 17 short steps down to the under-baptismal crawl. Each lip was worn to a half moon by boots that weren't for worship. At the bottom, 4 joists crossed like ribs, 2 notched to make a box the size of a coffin. In the middle lay a coffin lid narrowed to child's shoulders, its planks hand-planed, 4 nails peened flat. The first torn paper, one of 3, hung from a joist where pitch wept, a page of church minutes with one corner ripped away, and a pencil line on the margin that read, "The boy must go down to bring us up." The air carried wet earth and lamp oil. Names anchor this docket. Sheriff Cullen Briggs, Deputy Amos Hargrove, Elder Ephraim Sutter, Deacon Mervyn Coates, Dr. Foster Blaine, County Clerk Abner Holcomb, Sexton Niles Threadgill, Church Clerk Lottie, Crane, Neighbor Bertie Calhoun. 9 names, no more. Briggs counted first, because numbers talk before men do. 17 steps, 4 nails, 3 torn pages, 11 for the boy. He wrote them down in a narrow hand in the inquest he would later misfile, the same hand that measured the bell rope from the beam and marked at 17 feet a rough splice where hemp had been cut and tied back. Dr. Foster Blaine knelt at the crawl mouth with a tin-handled trowel and a roll of linen 9 inches wide. He brushed the airway of the small skull, slid his finger in as a test, and found a plug that ran 4 inches before stopping his nail. He eased it with the back of the linen and set the plug on the coffin lid, a dark Compic loaf the length of a pocket knife. He wrote, "Soil in airway, 4 in a ledger that had a tear at the 8th leaf from a different day. Deacon Coates produced a paper from his coat lining, folded to fit a palm. It was the second torn minutes page, writing cramped and pencil dull. On it, a line of numbers. 3, turnings of rope, 11 breath prayers, 4 men to lift. Near the bottom, the sentence everyone said later they had not read, "The boy must go down to bring us up." The pencil had dug the paper where the words "must go down" sat, making a trough you could feel with a thumb. Sexton Niles Threadgill pried at the coffin lid with a bar flat as a ruler. The lid lifted, not with a squeal, but with a hush, wood that had drunk damp for a season. Inside, straw stuck to cloth that had been white. 11 inches from the lid's head end, the cloth went stiff, then gritty where soil had come in through a crack and settled like a second shroud. Under the small hand bones, Blaine found fibers. He tweezed them into a matchbox lined with clean paper. Hemp, bell rope. He said, "Under nails," and shut the box. Lottie Crane, who kept the Bethel minutes in a hand trained to copy precisely, arrived with her fingers smudged with lamp black and oil because she had rubbed out an old line on a board. She pulled the 3rd torn page from under her apron, corners notched in the same angle as the first. Across its top margin ran dates from a spring where baptisms usually rise. Below, 2 names crossed through. To the side, the same sentence in a quieter pencil, a second hand, "The boy must go down to bring us up." Abner Holcomb, county clerk, came with a satchel that used to hold fertilizer bills. He brought the sheriff's inquest, misfiled under fence complaints, and set it on the pulpit as if a pulpit were a desk. The inquest sheet had 4 lines, not more. Name, unknown boy, about 11. Place, under baptismal. Observation, by soil and airway, 4 in. And the last line, misrolled, rope fibers under nails. Holcomb said the sheet ended up in the wrong book. He said it under his breath. Bertie Calhoun stood in the doorway with flour on her cuffs. She lived 3 farms east and heard the bells of Bethel whether she wanted to or not. She told Briggs she had counted 3 tugs on the rope, not full. Tolls, just pulls that rustled the tongue. Then 11 breath prayers said together in a hush that carried like a chant through a crate. She said she saw 4 men move as one in the moonlight by the east fence, each spaced a shovel's length. In the morning, she found a thumb-length fray of hemp on the nail of her gate. The air carried wet earth and lamp oil. The first anchor scene belongs to the place where no one should stand. Briggs went down the 17 steps, one hand on the wall, one hand on a lantern with its wick trimmed to a hair. The crawl space ran 15 feet deep under the baptismal, low enough that a grown man had to hunch. 4 joists crossed overhead. Two had the notch that made a coffin cradle. Niles Threadgill set a plank across bricks, 11 inches wide, and made himself a narrow bench. Dr. Blaine handed across the trowel, the linen, the tweezers. Each item counted as if someone would snatch them. Briggs slid his palm across the floor. The dirt was not raw. It had been packed by knees. At the head of the box, he found a round cut in the pine, an airway circle. He measured it with the carpenter's rule, 2 inches across. The wood around it showed polish, bright as a spoonback, the way rubbing makes even bone shine. He put his ear to the cut and smelled the earth below, clean as a cellar. He tapped the cut once with the rule. The sound came back dull. Blaine's finger came up gray with the airway plug. He set that 4-inch loaf on a square of the church newspaper, the Bethel Herald, dated 2 weeks before. The ink bled. He teased fibers from under the child's. Nails, 1 each from 4 fingers, each about a 1/4 inch. He rolled them into the matchbox and closed the lid with a slide that snicked like a tooth. He said, without a sermon, "Hemp cord, not cotton." Coates leaned his head against a joist where, 11 months before, somebody had penciled a verse that had rubbed out to a shadow. The edges of the writing stayed where the middle had gone. You could read the tail of a G, the foot of an R. He recited his own line, "Must go down to bring us up," like a man counting fence posts, not like a prayer. His chalk left white dust on the joist, 3 dabs spaced like tether points. Hargrove crouched by the bell rope splice. At 17, feet from the beam, the hemp had been cut and retied, 7 turns of a simple knot, 2 tails trimmed close, 1 tail frayed a hand's width. He measured the knot and wrote, 3 turns, 2 tails, 1 fray, making numbers do grammar. He blew on the splice, and dust, fine as flour, lifted and settled. Briggs put the coffin lid back on and set a hand on each nail head, 4 in a row each, with a hammer blossom where a man had peened it flat from below. He wrote 4 peen marks and circled the 4 as if it needed protection. He looked at the steps, then at the boy's bones, and thought like a lawman who had once been a father and now was only the first. He said, "We will bring the lid up." They prized the lid and handed it up the 17 steps like a stretcher, 4 men, 1 corner each. On the upper floor, the lid lay across 2 pews pushed together. Hargrove set the matchbox on the pew end. Coates set his folded minutes on the lid. Lottie set her 3rd page on the lid. Holcomb set the inquest on the lid. 4 papers lay on 4 planks, numbers obeying their own gravity. The bell rope, measured before, hung slack and dumb. Niles took it in his hand and lifted, only enough to feel weight. He said, 3 pulls and a rest is what I do to steady the sound. He did not pull. He set the rope down. The frayed tail brushed the floor and left 5 grains of hemp, the kind that travel in cuffs and under nails. That night, Briggs took the inquest back to town to put it where it belonged. He stopped at Holcomb's desk. Holcomb's ledger had cattle brands and fence lines, 11 brands on 1 page, coiled like snakes. Briggs slid the inquest under death's May, not under fence complaints. He wrote under baptismal, again on the margin, in case a hand later tried to say it had been somewhere else. The second anchor scene belongs to distance and a pattern the eye sees when it stands outside. Bertie Calhoun went to her well after dark, because the day had fried her, in the evening at least, let a woman listen. On that Wednesday, she heard, not the bell toll, but the breath between pulls, the rope coming back to center. 3 pulls, short, not a full ring. Then a hush, then 11 whispers running together, the way corn leaves talk when the wind stays low. Then wood dragged on wood, 4 feet's length. She put the dipper on the well shelf and walked to the fence line that marked Bethel's south yard. She counted 4 shadows moving 2 by 2. 1 carried a spade on his shoulder. 1 held something under his arm the size of a loaf. She hid behind a sweet gum and watched the men lift a trap, 2 inches of wood with a cut circle, set it aside, and make a motion like setting a lid. The bell rope shivered and did not speak. When they were gone, she crossed the yard in 10 steps and knelt by the east fence where the gatepost splinters catch the careless. On the nail that always snags a skirt, she found a thumb-length fray of hemp with 3 strands twisted, 1 broken. She put the fray in her apron and tied the corner with a knot so small it hurt her. Nails. On the way home, she counted 17 pace lengths and stopped when the earth smelled like the inside of a cellar. At dawn, she brought the fray to Briggs. He set it beside the matchbox and wrote, "Rope fray, gate nail, 1 in." He matched the twist to the splice. The match did not need a cord. It needed eyes. The air carried wet earth and lamp oil. Holcomb, meanwhile, took the 3 torn minutes pages from the lid and put them in his satchel. "To keep them safe," he said. He walked to his office, not the courthouse, but the store where he rented a desk. He set the satchel on his chair and turned to get a key from a peg. He turned back, and the satchel had slid just an inch, and the top gaped. He shut it. Later. That day, when Briggs asked him to hand over the pages, Holcomb produced 2. The third, the one with a full penciled sentence across the margin and the scratch that broke the pencil point, was gone. Lottie Crane stiffened when she saw the missing page. She reached under her apron for what she had kept back, a scribble of the same line copied on a scrap with a note of who had said it at meeting. Deke, Coates, motion. The boy must go down to bring us up. Seconded by Sutter, carried. She had written that in pencil, so faint you had to tilt the paper to read it. She laid the scrap on Holcomb's desk. Holcomb said, "Minutes are not binding unless signed." Lottie said, "They bind the ones who say them." Briggs followed, paper with his hands, because paper slips. He went to the church and looked for the minute book itself. Lottie said it had been loaned out, a phrase that made a sheriff's jaw work. She led him to the pulpit where a patch of new wood had been set. Under that patch, nailed with 4 tacks, they found a backing board with pencil ghosts, dates, names, a note of visitors, 11, and a faint repeat of the line as if someone had pressed hard and left a shallow engraving on the board below. Briggs rubbed lampblack across the board and watched the letters rise. He read the sentence again. Sutter stood in the aisle with his Bible half open and said, "We intended to cleanse a thing too long-fouled." He put 2 fingers on the Bible and pressed down hard enough to make the boards sing. Coates looked at his shoes and touched chalk to the sole. 3 dots no one but he would see. Hargrove wrote Elder Press 2 fingers in his notebook because he had trained himself to turn gestures into numbers. Dr. Blaine, hungry for sequence, took the matchbox to his small room behind the apothecary. He rolled each hemp fiber onto a slide of glass and noted 4 under the nails of one hand, 2 under the other, and a dusting of grit under the thumb where a boy might have clawed at the hemp once. He wrote fibers, hemp, under nails, 4 to 2 so on grit, and sketched each with a blunt pencil that left the fibers fatter than life. Niles Threadgill returned to the crawl with 2 planks and a will to see it made right. He laid a support under the joist that had the polished airway circle and measured the circle again, 2 inches across. He set his palm over it. The wood was cool and smelled like damp linen. He set a candle and watched how the flame leaned. It didn't. No draft. He wrote on the joist with chalk, "No air," and put the chalk back in his pocket. The third anchor scene belongs to paper found in motion and gone in the same breath. Briggs took Holcomb's satchel and carried it himself to the courthouse. He didn't trust a satchel set on a chair. He put the satchel on the clerk's table and opened it with Holcomb watching. 2 torn minutes pages lay there, edges matching when he overlapped them, dates aligning so clean it hurt. He slid them into a drawer and locked the drawer. He turned to his own desk and pulled out the inquest, the sheet he had moved from fence complaints to death's May. He laid it on the table and pressed the 3 papers into one stack. Inquest, minutes, minutes. He drew a pencil line across all 3, a single stroke, so he could tell later if they had been separated. He left the stack there while he crossed the street to fetch Dr. Blaine, to show a doctor what a pencil line can do. When he returned, the stack had shifted half an inch, and the top page, the inquest, had slid. The pencil line no longer ran clean. It stopped at the edge of the top sheet. The lower 2 held the line, perfect. The inquest had a new top edge. Hargrove's old coffee had curled it, and someone had flattened it. The last line, rope fibers under nails, had a smear where a finger had pressed before the ink had set. Briggs opened the drawer he had locked. It was unlocked. He looked at Holcomb. Holcomb looked at the window. Lottie, who had followed them in, stepped to the table and set her copied scrap on top again. She breathed out, counting to 3. "Say it again," she said, not to anyone in particular. The air carried wet earth and lamp oil. The 4th anchor scene, the public one, belonged to the church's own hall because the courthouse smelled of paper and ink, and everyone had decided that was a place where mistakes happen. Elder Sutter, who could still fill a room with his voice without raising it, said he would open Bethel for a reckoning. People came, men, with hats in their hands, women with shawls tied across their chests, 11 children brought because there was no one to leave them with. Briggs brought 6 objects and set them on a table that had once been an altar when the church was a schoolhouse. First, the coffin lid, 4 nails still seated, 4 blossoms, proud on top. Second, the matchbox with 4 hemp fibers and 2 more and the grit under the thumb, each on a strip of paper 1 inch long. Third, the 2 torn minutes pages laid side by side, so the edges married and the dates overlapped in the spring column. Fourth, the inquest sheet with the pencil line broken and the last line smudged where rope fibers under nails had blurred. Fifth, Bertie's thumb-length fray tied to a fence nail by a knot, so small you could not untie it without breaking the hairs of hemp. Sixth, a soil core in a bottle cut from the airway plug, 4 inches, in a column the width of a finger. Dr. Blaine stood without hat. He held the matchbox open so the room could see the fibers and said only, "Under nails." Niles tapped the lid once with a knuckle so the sound would enter people who never went below the floor. Holcomb tried to stand in the back and shrink. Coates looked at the 2 minutes pages and moved his lips, reading silently the line that had his pencil pressure in it. Briggs lifted the soil bottle to eye level and held it where the window light went through the brown. He set it down beside the lid. He touched the 4 peened blossoms in a row and then the 4 inches of soil in the bottle, a finger to a number. He said, 4 nails, 4 inches, 11 years. He did not say the rest. He waited. Then a woman who had not spoken at a meeting in her life said one sentence everyone remembered with a heat that made men stubborn. "You don't cleanse a church with a living child's breath." The room froze as if she had set the clock in a pail of water. Elder Sutter closed his Bible as if closing it would make the sentence go away. Coates put both hands on the table and spread his fingers as if measuring. Briggs didn't preach. He took a pencil and wrote on the inquest's blank back, "Public acknowledgement," a phrase that is not the same as confession. He set the pencil down with its point toward Coates so there would be no doubt who ought to pick it up. Coates didn't. Sutter didn't. Holcomb put his hand on the coffin lid, felt the peen blossoms, and took his hand away as if he had touched griddle iron. They broke at last. Meetings always end. Briggs took the 6 things away: lid, matchbox, minutes, inquest, fray, bottle. He put them in a box that had once held hymnals. He marked the box, Bethel May, and wrote "Keep" on the side. He brought the box to Holcomb's office because the courthouse had a shelf with a key and the church had a porch where wind could rule. 3 winters after that, the box had moved from a locked shelf to the 4th shelf, unlocked, because Holcomb had moved the key to a drawer and then to a pocket, and then forgotten both. The inquest had slid under fence complaints. Again, the minutes had 1 edge eaten by mice, a nibble that took the second half of the word "bring." The matchbox still slid, and the fibers still lay within, 4 and 2 in the grit under the thumb. The bottle had a dried line at 4 inches, the place where water had left and left a measure behind. Briggs kept writing numbers in his inquest book because numbers don't fail even when men do. He wrote 11, boy, unknown. Then he wrote 11, breath prayers. He wrote 3, torn pages. Then 3, rope tugs. He wrote 4, nails peened. Then 4, mend a lift. He wrote 17, steps. Then 17, feet splice. The left column, the things that were, sat. The right column, the things men said they needed, stared back. Sutter kept preaching. He said his Bible in the same groove on the pulpit each week, a groove worn by 20 years of leather. He waved his hand at the baptismal and said, "Water washes." He never said what lay under that water was wood, and under that wood was dirt and a box and a boy. He spoke of body and breath, and people nodded because nodding is easier than pulling a floor. Coates kept chalk in his pocket and made lists because lists look like work from 5 pews back. On one list, he wrote 3 ropes, 11 prayers, 4 men, 1 boy. He folded that list and slid it in a hymn book. Lottie found it a season later and didn't turn it over because she didn't think there was anything on the back. There wasn't. She burned it with stove kindling and afterward could still see the numbers lined up in her head like marchers. Bertie kept the fence nail with the knot in it on a windowsill. The thumb-length fray grew brittle and shed. She counted her steps when she went to the well and counted her breaths when she lay down, because a woman sometimes must tie numbers around her to keep from floating. She told the story 3 times in 3 winters to 3 people, and then stopped because it didn't change minds. It only broke hers. Holcomb wrote "misfiled" on a slip he kept under a paperweight and would hold up when anyone asked about a thing not where it ought to be. He kept the slip clean for a year. He touched it every day. The oil from his fingers made an oval. One day that slip wasn't under the glass. He looked for it 11 times. The number meant something to him now, and found it behind the ledger where fence complaints grew like weeds. Blaine wrote a letter to a lab in Jackson asking if anyone could say hemp from jute with a glass and a lens. He got back a postcard with a number for a professor and a note. Send 4 fibers, underlined twice. He put 4 and 2 in 2 envelopes and wrote Bethel, boy 11 on the corner. He didn't send them because he didn't trust the mail with bones. Niles blocked the crawl airway with a plug of pine and drove 4 nails in it. He wrote 4 nails on the joist and chalked a crosshatch around it the size of his palm. He went home and cleaned his hands with lamp oil because soap wouldn't lift the smell of wet dirt. He slept and woke and smelled his hands again. The air carried wet earth and lamp oil. Briggs knew he had one more place to put the numbers that didn't lie. He took his inquest book, the minutes, the bottle, and the matchbox to a metal drawer he had taken from a burned store. He put the drawer in a place that had a lock and a window and a rule that a man had to write his name to get inside. He called the place what it was, the county's room. He wrote on a tag, Bethel, 1909, boy 11-4 in airway, rope fibers. Sutter saw the numbers leave and felt better. When numbers are in a room with a lock, men believe they are not in their heads. He preached a sermon about forgetting what is behind that had as its text a verse everyone knows because it lets a man sleep. Coates nodded. Lottie kept her copy scrap under her stove brick. Hargrove never forgave himself for letting the drawer lie open 1 hour on one afternoon. He needed coffee more than honesty. He stared at the pencil line across the inquest and the way it broke, at the top sheet when he came back. He measured the gap, 1/8 of an inch, and wrote the measure in the margin as if it were a step in a set of stairs. Abner Holcomb tied a string around his pencil so he wouldn't mislay it, and ended up wearing the pencil all day. He chewed the string and spit hemp hairs, and when he died his fingers had a groove where the pencil had lived. The string fell into the desk and froze in ink, a fossil of a man who could not hold on to the one page that mattered. Blaine retired to a house with a porch that faced a field and took the matchbox and the bottle home one week to show a cousin why he had not quit medicine earlier. He brought them back the next day because the bottle looked wrong in his kitchen, like a pastor in a card hall. He wrote "returned" on a slip and added the number 1, those little numbers a man uses to tell himself he didn't fail. Niles died with his hands clean and his shoes under the bed. Lottie wrote his name in the minutes with a pencil sharpened to a blade. She wrote Niles Threadgill stood at the lid and put a dot to the side, not on the line, because she wanted to mark him without sending him down with the rest. Bertie lived until her hair went to threads and told a granddaughter the fence nail story with a smile because she had learned you have to lace horror with a little brightness, or a child drops it forever and never learns the lesson. The granddaughter kept the nail in a glass salt cellar. She labeled it Bethel rope, with stick-on letters that didn't exist when the boy went under. Briggs left the drawer key in a place he trusted less than a man and more than a shelf. He put it under his hat where his hair once had been. He wrote one more line on the inquest, to be read when proof is had. He signed his name small, so the page could hold more if someone had more to say. Time holds and erases in the same hand. The metal drawer rusted at the bottom. The tag string broke, the bottle's cork shrank, the matchbox slid. The minutes curled at the corner where mice learned paper tastes like flour. The inquest yellowed in a ring shaped like a man's coffee cup, who put his cup where it did not belong. The numbers didn't move. 11, 17, 4, 3. Years later, exactly how many isn't the point. The state lab typed a slip on a black machine and put it in a file with a green tab. They named 4 inches of soil in a cylinder and said, in 4 lines and a space, what men had said with their noses in a crawl. Granular loam, churchyard, compacted in airway, indeterminate origin. The last word sat there like a stone dropped in a bucket. It didn't sink. It just chilled. Briggs's file, which he had called an inquest, and which Holcomb had called a complaint, and which Sutter had called a mistake, went to microfilm on a day when a man in a tie had time and patience and enough light to see dust in a beam. The man fed the pages one by one. He wrote on a log, frame 14, minutes 1, frame 15, minutes 2, frame 16, inquest, Bethel boy. He turned the crank. The screen jumped with dust motes. The last 2 paragraphs are the blade we owe. Here is what is closed. The boy's coffin lay beneath the baptismal. 4 nails held the lid. A plug of soil 4 inches long occupied his airway. Hemp fibers lived under his nails. 3 torn minutes pages carried the line. In 2 hands, the boy must go down to bring us up. A sheriff misfiled and then fetched. An inquest, and then drew a pencil line to bind papers that did not want to touch. A neighbor brought a rope fray that matched a splice at 17 feet. A public table carried 6 objects, and 1 sentence from the back row pinned the room still. If they could all smell wet earth under the floor, why did no one lift the lid until a shovel blade rang? If a deacon could write that a child must go down to bring grown men up, why did 4 men's hands press instead of cut the rope? When the volunteer at the library leaned toward the microfilm and turned past the frame where the minutes sat whole and before the frame that should have held the inquest clean, the screen brightened and then went gray, dust across glass, and at the base of that gray the light caught a curve in the grain, a faint jawline traced by scratches and drag. The soft arc of bone suggested in grit and glare, while, in the margin, the state slip's last word held like frost. Indeterminate.